Defending Israel with David Harris is made possible in part by Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Paul and Lynn Light Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello JBS viewers, I'm David Harris and welcome back to Defending Israel. Another wonderful guest this week, someone I've known a long time and admired greatly. Someone with whom I've collaborated through ISCAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. She's a public intellectual, she's a scholar, she's a writer, and she has now written a new book which is very relevant to our program. It's entitled Be a Refusenik, a Jewish Student's Survival Guide. But wait, if you think the Refusenik references only the country of her birth, the Soviet Union, it's that plus much more. It speaks about students today. Izabella, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, why this book? How did the idea come to you, and what's its purpose?
So the idea, I think I've been working toward this book for a number of years. I've been writing about Soviet anti-Zionism for many years and how some of the patterns that we experienced back in the USSR, and I grew up in the USSR, suddenly appear here in the form that's today called new anti-Semitism. In fact, it's not new at all, even in America, but many people are just discovering it today. And so some of the patterns of that anti-Zionism are here, and we've seen them clearly after October 7th. And I also have been writing about the Refuseniks. And who are the Refuseniks? They're essentially Jewish activists in the Soviet Union who at some point, largely after 67, rediscover a sense of peoplehood and connection to the Jewish people. And remember, they live behind an iron curtain. The Soviet Union tells them there is no connection between you and Jews anywhere else in the world. The idea of Jewish peoplehood is a fiction. And by the way, no religion and no culture and no Hebrew and nothing Jewish for you except for that mark in your passport that really marks you for discrimination.
Right, the fifth point, piati punkt.
Exactly. But at some point, and that happens after Israel's victory in the Six-Day War, they rediscover all of that. They rediscover a sense of Jewish pride, and they rediscover a feeling that they actually want to be part of the Jewish people. They want to understand what it means to be a Jew. And when somebody calls them a Zionist, when the state, the propaganda calls them a Zionist, what does it really mean? And so this struggle that they begin left actually a massive imprint on the Jewish people everywhere, including in America, and you know it really, really well. You were such an important part of that story on the Soviet Jewry movement side in the US. But you know, a lot of times that's, for those who remember that story, which played out in American Jewish side for 25 years and was so critical, people remember it as a struggle for emigration, as a struggle for Soviet Jewish emigration. And what I argue in this book, and I've done it before, is that it was much deeper than that. And that's what makes it so relevant for the current moment. It was really the struggle for a renewal and a deepening of a Jewish identity, for reclaiming Zionism against the propaganda, for reclaiming everything that they said is prohibited and shouldn't be part of your life, and rejoining the Jewish people. And I felt that it was incredibly relevant for this moment.
Okay, so it's organized around, if you will, parallel stories. So 6 chapters, each focusing on one or more Soviet Refuseniks. In one case, you talk about the 18 families from Soviet Georgia.
Right.
But let me focus on the 6th chapter, because interestingly, both of them have actually been on the show. Natan Sharansky, who spent 9 years in the Gulag, and Shabbos Kestenbaum, the young student from Harvard University. Why did you choose them? Why did you juxtapose them? And what can we, the readers, take from that story?
So I'm so glad you asked this. By the way, Natan has written the intro for the book.
In fact, I see it here on the cover.
Yes.
Forward by Natan Sharansky.
I'm incredibly grateful. So that chapter is called Lead with Jewish. And the reason I put them together is because both of them say in their own way something really, really important that I think is crucial. They say in different ways, under the influence of different circumstances, they say, we are in a situation, we were talking earlier, you said the house is on fire. The house is on fire. And we're in a situation where we have to sort of put forward the priorities of the Jewish people and lead with that. I think American Jews often prioritize their political commitments, their broad political commitments. The majority of them are Democrat, and this is what really matters. If you look at what Chabos does, he was a Democrat his whole life. He even voted for Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders. He talks about how he was going door to door.
Exactly. And then October 7th happens. And it triggers an inner change and a rethinking about what is important. And he looks honestly at the Democratic Party, and he looks honestly at the Republican Party, and he feels that internally his commitments are still, he's not just a Democrat, he's progressive. His commitments are progressive, actually. But he sees that the Democratic Party is not doing anything to help the Jewish students who are screaming for help. And in fact, they are, you could even say that they're supporting and encouraging what's happening on campuses after October 7th. And so he realigns his priorities. And it's an inner journey that I find very similar. You obviously can't compare what Natan went through in the Gulag, right, in these high security KGB prisons, hunger strikes, force feeding. Isolation, absolutely. Just none of us can imagine that. And we're not at a place, thank God, where this would happen to somebody like Chabos. But pretty bad things can happen to in the American context, right? Here, if you are openly a Zionist, you can lose a lot of things. You can lose your friends, you can lose your university positioning, or you can lose a place in progressive organizations that you're part of. You can lose your job, you can lose your reputation. So Chabos talks about how when he begins to appear at Republican gatherings, he talks about how it's lonely for him there. He feels he belongs on the other side. But why does he go there? Because he understands that at this moment when the house is on fire, he leads with Jewish. The Jewish priorities is what drives him. And I think we all need to be thinking about that, because it's everything is very serious. It's not a joke anymore.
I'm grateful for this book for another reason. I've tried for years to convince Jewish institutions, synagogues, day schools, after schools, to include the Soviet Jewry story as part of the curriculum. And not just for historical reasons, but for inspirational reasons. The few against the mighty, the success of the movement, one of the great human rights stories in modern history. But you might have found the way that I didn't, to merge the past with the present in a way that can reach these institutions. Since the book's been out, I know it's just recent, Izabella, what kind of reception are you getting both from the big institutions and then the startups and the synagogues and the schools? I hope a good one, but tell us the truth.
Well, there's a lot of enthusiasm that I'm seeing, and where it's coming from, I see the most of this enthusiasm coming from grassroots organizations. And I find it really interesting and very symbolic also. There is an echo in that to the Soviet Jewry movement itself, which was very much driven, the movement for the Refuseniks in America was driven by students. It was really the students who pushed forward with it until the institutions saw that they can't not join this anymore. The power, the pressure from below was very, very strong. So I was just recently at the Z3 conference in California, and I gave a couple of talks, and it was even before the book came out. And the people who came up to me and said, look, we really need your book, and we really need you to come and give a talk. And we are this small grassroots organization, or not so small, actually. There are lots and lots of teenagers that we speak to and their parents, and we need this message. And I think, unfortunately, we're in a moment where we don't see a lot of leadership from
You're talking about Jewish leadership or
Jewish leadership. Jewish leadership.
You're not seeing it.
I'm not really seeing it, I have to say. In a way that's
What are you looking
needed.
for? How would you define in this moment in time what constitutes Jewish leadership? Put aside titles and resumes.
Yeah.
What makes a Jewish leader in a post-October 7th world?
People who would deliver a straight-out message, who would speak very clearly about what they see, and inspire. We don't see people who would inspire. I think that's what's missing right now. The big Jewish organizations are trying to respond to this moment, but there's just something missing. And I think it's that element. They're not really. I think they're afraid still. They're afraid
of what?
I think they're afraid of alienating certain constituencies
Of their own.
Their own. I think
or partners.
So. Partners. Maybe it's donors, the donor base. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I think what I feel, a lot of it is just intuitive. I feel like they look over their shoulder a lot of times. When you come to them and propose something that will inspire people and lead the people. And the young people, like the ones that I describe, are the ones who feel. Look, I'll give you a specific example. So pretty much every single one of them that when I interviewed them told me that at a particular moment when they're about to take a decisive step forward, somebody comes from a campus organization and tells them, don't provoke, don't confront, don't argue, don't
make too much noise.
Don't make too much noise. We just had our rally, and right across the street there is an anti-Israel rally, but don't go, just walk on by. And all of them make the decision to confront and to provoke and to go and to lead and to inspire. So what we're talking about...
And in some cases to sue, to
and
litigate.
in some cases to sue, exactly. So with Shabbos, I described this in the book, and you may remember it was a viral video when he decides to, he comes up to the MIT Gaza encampment, and it's closed. He is not allowed to walk through it. And he insists on walking through it. He confronts the guards who stand there. He even confronts the police and says, why are you preventing me from walking through it? I'm an American Jew. He is there with an American flag. And he insists on walking through. And he does, and he walks through, and he gives a little speech in the heart of the compound. That video went viral. And when I talked to him about it, he said, we had just had a rally nearby, and I was told, don't go there. But I had just told students, I had just told the Jewish people at the rally, young people, we need to be, we need to be defiant, and we need to, take a stand. And so I couldn't take that advice. He wanted to lead by example, but he said he didn't want to create anything big. He just wanted to walk through it. And he says, it's all in the book. So he says, I'm actually socially, I'm shy. I didn't want to create a scene. But then when he walked up to it and he saw that he was being prohibited, something just snapped. And he was like, I have to go through it, also because there are others looking at me. And to me, that's the kind of leadership that arises out of recognizing what's important, out of knowing what moves you, and this realization that you're at the head of something, at the head of a movement that hasn't really formed yet, but you are the one who knows and can lead, which is why I honestly think, and I say this in the book, I think the real strategies, one of my goals with this book, I had multiple objectives, but one of them was to give students some tools, some way of thinking about what's going on and about their role and about what they can do to empower them to think differently in a more empowered way rather than a reactive way. The real strategies, I don't think they will come from the big established organizations. I think they will come from the students themselves. But what they need to do is to to start thinking of themselves in that more empowered way, start recognizing what tradition they're following, they realizing this gives them lineage. One thing that this book does is it gives them lineage of Jewish heroism, Jewish courage, Jewish defiance, and I think we don't have enough of it. A lot of times I would give a talk and I would ask, who are the Jewish heroes that you know about? And people will say, well, there are the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and then there are the Maccabees. And this is all people can name. And I just think, well, that's just not right. Israelis will name a lot of people, a lot of Israelis who have fought for the country.
Right.
American Jews often don't know who to name, and I'm hoping that this will be an inspiration.
Well, it comes back to the point that most American Jews today do not even know the Soviet Jewry story itself, right, much less the heroes that emerged.
Right.
And by the way, when you were talking about Shabbos walking through the encampment, it reminded me of Natan Sharansky on the day of his release, when the Soviet side told him to walk straight across the bridge to the western side, straight across the bridge, and the moment they released him, what did he do? He zigzagged,
right,
as his final act of defiance.
Yes.
So, again, not to draw too close a parallel between Shabbos Kestenbaum and Natan Sharansky, but this act of, I'm going to assert my dignity.
Exactly.
No matter what.
Exactly.
Okay, so you said you want people to get some skills. So let's drill down. We want people to read the book, obviously. Don't give it all away.
Right.
But what do you hope someone who actually reads this book, and again, I want to show the cover so people can look for it and purchase it. What do you hope by the end of this book people will do differently than before they started to read this book?
A lot of it is mindset. And every chapter here, after I tell the stories, it has a chapter on mindset. I call it Refusenik mindset. So some of it is how you think about yourself. And here I want to say something that, I found that it can be controversial in America. In Russia, we really value and praise our dissidents, especially those of us who come out of the Soviet experience. For us, the dissidents, there's a power in being a dissident. Because you realize that you actually stand against something very, very powerful, and you speak the truth.
There's nobility in suffering.
Well, suffering...
And you're not just talking about Jewish dissidents. People like Andrei Sakharov, for
yes,
example.
Yes.
Non-Jewish,
yes,
but the people who stood up on principle against the power.
Yes, exactly. Speaking truth to power, which
right,
actually is very much in the Jewish tradition. Right, and I say it in the book, from Abraham to Moses to, Miriam to Mordechai, we are a people who stand up to power. And so what I think I want to communicate is I think all of us actually who are in this fight now as Jews are dissidents. And I think there is power in recognizing that because we oppose a wall of consensus, growing consensus, solidifying consensus on what Zionism is, on what Jews are, on what Israel is, on what Jewish people are. And I think once you realize that you are a dissident, I think in America suffering is optional.
We're not quite where the Russians have been for centuries.
Exactly. I don't think it's a necessary ingredient.
Okay. So that's not necessarily one of the takeaways. You must suffer.
No, definitely,
okay.
Definitely not. But I think you feel empowered when you recognize that you stand against and speak the truth. One specific thing that I hope young people will do is reclaim their Zionism. And I talk about it in one of the chapters. When they defame Zionism, when they tell you need to give it up, that's the time to actually double down on it and reclaim it and learn it. I'm not just saying grab onto it as some kind of an ideology and, something that will save you. Learn what it is. This is the source of Jewish power because it's deeply connected, of us as a people, because it's deeply connected to the sense of Jewish peoplehood and goes back to the Bible. So I have a chapter, an incredible Refusenik story of a man, Boris Kuchubievsky, who wrote an incredible essay about Zionism. as he was being tried as a traitor, again, sent to the Gulag, well, you know what, if he can reclaim Zionism, and the way he argues it, I think will really resonate with us today, if he can do it in the midst of that, well, we should be able to do that as well. And I think finding each other, because I think a lot of times Jewish students feel isolated, finding each other, recognizing that you can, if you are together, start thinking strategically, and then you will, you know, if I have time, can I give another? I want to give another
Please.
example. So, you know, one of the people I profile is Lisha Baker from Columbia University, one of the co-authors of that famous letter, the Letter of 500. It was called the Letter
Sure.
of In Our Name. It was called. So they, you know, once he and his friends begin to protest, they're in the midst of it. And so they see what's going on from the inside, and they can reassess their strategies as they go along. And so at some point they realize that actually, wow, these protests are not just anti-Israel, they're also anti-American. And so they come up with an idea. They go to a rally, an anti-Israel rally, carrying only American flags. They don't even bring Israeli flags with them, and they're attacked. And one of them, one of their flags is burned. One of them finds his shirt on fire. I think Lisha himself. And so this is exactly what happens once you realize that, once you engage in this, and you realize that you are in this fight and you're committed to it, the ideas will come. This is a really amazing proactive step. You know, the video came out of it, it went viral, and you could really, the other side was really shown as being anti-American, not just anti-Israel. So I think that once they take a more proactive approach, they will come up with strategies. You know, the ADL, the AJC, they won't be able to give them the strategies. You know, the students will have to come up with them themselves.
Okay, so you're telling them you hope that you'll come out of this with a greater sense of self-worth, a greater sense of willingness to stand up against that wall, as you say, that's been constructed, to dig deep and understand Zionism better. Let's personalize this again. You left the Soviet Union at the age of 19 with your family. You came to the United States, but about 5 years ago, you decided to move from the United States to Israel. So personalize it. Why? What does Zionism mean to you?
First of all, I always felt that there is something special in Israel for me, where I feel a sense of belonging that is really unique. And I want to clarify, you know, I'm an American citizen and I love America, and I feel, you know, my parents and friends are here. I'm always, sometimes people ask me, where do you live? And I say I'm on the airplane, you know, because I'm always traveling back and forth. And I'm forever grateful for everything this country gave us. In Israel, I feel like I'm part of something else. Like I'm part of the Jewish people in a way that I find a hard time feeling here. And so I just wanted to be, I wanted to be there, and I wanted to experience it. And I also happen to think that, you know, the future of the Jewish people is being crafted there. You know, it's the Hebrew culture, it's the language. I love being where Israeli music plays in Hebrew, you know, where they sing songs that are actually, it's popular music that draws on biblical tradition. I find it really incredible. You know, there'll be lines from liturgy in music that's completely by secular artists because it's so much part of the culture. So yes, I moved there in part also because it was 2020 and the anti-Semitism was really rising.
So this is well before October 7th.
It's well before October 7th, yes. It was during Corona, actually. And if you remember that summer of 2020, when everybody was sitting home and the online just exploded and suddenly anti-Semitism was everywhere. I came to Israel. I remember I landed, it was in August, and I realized just how much pressure I felt from experiencing it, that anti-Semitism in the US. And suddenly it was relieved and was a huge relief for me.
On the optimism-pessimism spectrum, how do you see Israel's future?
Israel's future, I think, is bright. I'm completely optimistic about it. I don't even know what to say.
Because I'm going to ask you next, on the American Jewry spectrum, where do you fall from optimism to pessimism?
Well, that's why I worry about a lot more. And I think that's why this book is so important in this moment, because I think, look, so much of what we talk about in America is fighting anti-Semitism. But you can't really fight. Who needs to lead that fight? Jews need to lead that fight. But if American Jews don't really know who they are, and I'm afraid that a lot of us don't, it will be hard to lead this fight. We see a lot of, right now, there is a psychological warfare that is being targeted at Jews, trying to tear Jewish young people away from the Jewish people, trying to convince them, that Zionism is terrible, Israel is terrible, the Jewish people are terrible, all kinds of things. And that's hard to reverse. We have to start thickening Jewish identity from an early age. Without that, I would say I would be very pessimistic. But I do think that there are people, however, who are recognizing it. And, anti-Semitism always produces, some people, it produces a split. Some Jews want to just separate themselves and not ever think about it. And some, actually, for some, it's an incentive. They become more curious, they become more interested, the sense of belonging strengthens. And I think we see that as well. And there are people like that, and it's not a small number, and that gives me hope. And the grassroots, again, are really what gives me hope.
And what's given me hope for many, many years, Izabella, is Russian-speaking Jews, whom I came to know in the 70s and 80s in the USSR, who came to Israel, who came to the United States, and who understood instinctively the importance of Israel, whether they lived there or not, and who understood instinctively they could smell anti-Semitism, however it was masqueraded. And so when others tried to make this distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, Soviet Jews said, wait a second, we've been there before.
Exactly.
Sound familiar?
We've seen this movie before, 100%. Which it's exactly why I started writing about it 8 or 9 years ago at this point, because I felt like, wow, don't you see it? Don't you realize? They say Zionism is racism, but they're really coming after you. And today it's
they're parroting Soviet lines from the 1960s.
Exactly. They're parroting Soviet lines, lines that were created by a totalitarian state, by the KGB, one of the most oppressive security agencies in the world. And look, it took me a long time. I remember when I was first giving lectures about it, I had to kind of tiptoe a little bit and,
right.
Today it's clear. The Zionism is racism people are coming after synagogues. They're coming after visible Jews. They're coming after Jewish students. It was so predictable, and ex-Soviet Jews really saw it.
But unfortunately, too many people chose not to listen to you and your colleagues for too long. But here we are. Here is the book. Again, it's called Be Refusenik, A Jewish Student's Survival Guide. The author is Izabella Taborovsky. Please get hold of the book and share it with your students in particular. This will give them the help that many of them desperately want and need. Izabella, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
And JBS viewers, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing you again next week. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel.